Dawn bled slowly into Silent Valley, a pale wash of light stretching across cliffs that rose like jagged teeth on either side of the narrow pass. The convoy's engines hummed low, steady, the sound warped and thrown back by the stone walls until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Dust stirred and hung in the still air, refusing to settle, turning the valley into a haze of suspended grit. Every detail pressed down with weight, the silence too thick, the echoes too long. Alex moved at the point, boots grinding gravel, rifle steady in her torn gloves. Her multicam uniform clung with dust and sweat, plate carrier scuffed from old impacts, straps biting into her shoulders with familiar weight. The Ops Corps helmet sat snug, goggles pushed up, braid trailing down her back like a rope pulled by every faint shift of air. She scanned the walls without slowing, wristwatch ticking loud in her head, each second sharp as a hammer on steel. Behind her, the Marines followed with routine confidence, their chatter low and careless. A corporal laughed at something muttered over comms, boots dragging slightly as though this mission was nothing but another box to tick. Trucks followed, tires grinding the earth, each one carrying supplies that needed to reach the next post. They trusted the map, the schedule, and the rules, each piece of protocol as solid in their minds as the cliffs looming above them. But Alex felt the wrongness coil through her chest, a weight heavier than her gear. The silence wasn't ordinary. Valleys had their own sounds, wind whistling, rocks settling, birds calling, but this one smothered every note. Her breath rasped shallow, every inhale sharp, and the pulse in her neck matched the ticking on her wrist. She flexed her gloved hand on the rifle's grip, leather torn, blood dried in the stitching. Stick to procedure. Alex, the squad leader murmured over comms, his voice flat, confident. Point doesn't drift. Keep your line. His tone carried no doubt, no tension, only the kind of authority that assumed obedience. She clicked her mic once in acknowledgement but kept her silence. Her lips pressed tight, jaw aching as she swallowed the words building in her throat. A crow burst upward from the cliffside without warning, wings cutting harsh against the sky. Others followed, startled into a ragged spiral, their cries sharp enough to sting the ears. Marines glanced up and then away, unbothered, dismissing the sudden flight as nothing more than nature stirring. Alex's eyes tracked the birds until they vanished into the brightening sky. Her gut tightened. Nature didn't scatter for nothing. She shifted her gaze back to the ridgelines, where shadows clung like stains. The rising sun stretched them thin, pulling long fingers across the rock, but some of them moved against the light, a ripple, faint, as though the stone itself breathed. She froze, heart hammering, and for a long second she thought she saw a shape detach itself from the cliff's edge before blending back into darkness. Her glove creaked as her grip on the rifle tightened. Another second ticked from her watch, a metronome of pressure. She forced herself to inhale, to steady her pulse, though every instinct screamed at her to break position. Procedure demanded stillness, trust, the quiet march forward. Instinct demanded movement, demanded climbing, demanded answers hidden in shadow. She felt caught between the two, every choice edged with threat. Dust swirled around her boots, stirred by the slow rumble of the convoy closing in. Trucks pressed forward, their sound magnified in the canyon until it felt like thunder crawling up her spine. The Marines walked with easy strides, rifles held loose, unaware of the weight pressing from above. They moved inside the script of the mission, while Alex felt the script bending under unseen hands. Her breathing came faster, shallow through grit and tension. The taste of dust coated her tongue, dry and metallic. She glanced again at the ridgeline, eyes narrowing against glare, watching shadows stretch too long. She thought of how many times she had trusted her instincts before, moments where hesitation meant survival. Then she thought of the punishments for breaking protocol, the weight of command's discipline, and the eyes of Marines who needed certainty. Her watch ticked, another second closer to catastrophe. She felt it in her bones. Silent Valley was wrong. and the wrongness was alive. She shifted her stance, boots sliding slightly on loose gravel, as if bracing for something that hadn't yet arrived. Her braid brushed against her plate carrier, a small, human movement swallowed by the still air. The goggles on her helmet rattled faintly as the convoy's vibration carried through the stone. She glanced over her shoulder at the Marines, their faces shadowed but calm, unaware that the valley was watching them. "Point. Keep moving," the squad leader repeated, firmer this time. His voice grated against her nerves, every word like a clamp on her chest. Alex exhaled slow, lips pressed tight, and gave the faintest nod. Outwardly, she obeyed. Inwardly, her instincts burned hotter, louder, undeniable. The valley narrowed ahead, walls closing in like jaws preparing to snap shut. Dust thickened, engines roared louder, and the sound bounced until it no longer felt like machines, but like something monstrous alive inside the rock. Alex's eyes swept the cliff edges again, scanning every fracture, every line of shadow. Her pulse quickened as she caught it again. Movement, too precise, too controlled to be stone-shifting. Her wristwatch ticked once more, louder than the convoy, louder than her breath. She knew what it meant. The valley was not empty. It was waiting. And as her eyes locked on the ridgeline, watching a shadow ripple where none should move, her instincts ignited with clarity. Procedure demanded silence. Instinct whispered survival. The trap was here, and the seconds were already running out. Alex broke from her line with a subtle shift, boots grinding softly into the gravel before she angled toward the rocks. Her breath caught tight in her chest as she scanned the valley again. But procedure faded against the relentless drum of instinct. The multicam fabric of her uniform scraped stone as she dropped low, braid dragging through dust, torn gloves clawing for purchase on jagged edges. Every move was a violation of orders, and yet it felt like the only path that mattered. The slope bit into her palms as she climbed, grit grinding into half-healed cuts beneath the leather. The convoy's engine noise pressed closer behind her, echoing through the valley until it drowned even her own heartbeat. She crawled higher, shoulders scraping the cliff, rifle heavy against her plate carrier. Her wristwatch ticked in her ear, each second sharp as a hammer, each one drawing the convoy toward disaster. A stone shifted beneath her knee, tumbling down into the dust below. She froze, eyes fixed on the ridgeline above, body pressed flat against the cold rock. The silence that followed was suffocating, the kind of silence that seemed to listen. Then a crow startled from a crevice, wings thrashing against the air as it joined another in ragged flight. Alex's eyes narrowed. Nature never fled without reason. At the crest of the slope, she pulled herself into cover, chest heaving against her plate carrier straps. She steadied her breathing, pressing her torn glove against the dirt, feeling the strange give beneath the surface. That was when she saw it disturbed earth, packed unevenly, a faint metallic glint catching light where soil had been crudely brushed back. Her stomach turned to ice. Mines. She shifted forward on her elbows, careful to distribute weight, eyes scanning every inch of ground. Wires snaked faintly across gravel, thin and dark, trailing to a cluster of shadowed rocks. Camouflage netting draped there, blending into stone. But up close, the outlines betrayed intention. Concealed firing positions, barrels hidden, waiting for the right spark. She followed the wires with her eyes, dread curdling in her chest. Through her scope, the valley's geometry changed in an instant. She could see it overlapping fields of fire. Sniper nests staggered along the ridges, mines funneled to force vehicles into choke points. It was a textbook kill zone, a trap engineered with merciless precision. Her throat closed. The convoy was less than a minute away from rolling directly into slaughter. She pressed her mic with a trembling finger, forcing her voice steady. This valley is wired. The words scraped out harsh and low, carrying her certainty. Static crackled back, then the squad leader's calm reply. Negative. Stay on point. Convoy keeps moving. Alex shut her eyes, blood rushing in her ears louder than the engines. Orders were clear. Her instincts screamed louder. Her gloves creaked as she clenched the rifle, torn seams biting into her palms. She shifted again, crawling higher, gaze cutting to the ridgeline where shadows clung unnaturally. Light caught briefly on glass. Optics. A sniper's scope waiting for its moment. Alex's breath faltered, heart hammering so loud it felt like it might betray her position. She lowered, pressing her helmet to stone, braid flattened by dust. The air tasted of oil and iron, a smell too sharp to be natural. She ran her eyes again over the disturbed soil, over the wires, over the rocks that weren't shaped by chance. Every sign screamed trap. Her wristwatch ticked again, seconds evaporating. Each tick felt like a trigger, the measure of life narrowing. Command's voice came again, firmer this time, grating through her headset. Point. Confirm your position. Keep your line. Alex pressed her lips tight, swallowing words she wanted to spit. Procedure demanded obedience. Instinct demanded rebellion. Her whole body vibrated with the tension of the choice. She glanced back down toward the valley floor. Marines walked steady, rifles slung casual, trusting the safety of the plan. Trucks followed, their sound magnified by the canyon walls until it felt like the ground itself moved with their weight. They were walking blind into a coffin, and only she could see it. Her pulse quickened, her skin cold under the rising sun. She lifted her gaze again to the ridgeline. A ripple of shadow bent against the light, shifting wrong, like figures crouching where stone should be still. She thought of her torn gloves, stained and raw, proof of every fight survived by instinct alone. She thought of the wristwatch ticking mercilessly, marking the seconds of men who didn't even know they were running out of time. Her throat burned with a silent curse. She couldn't obey. She couldn't let them die bound to orders. The silence of the valley pressed closer, choking, until it felt like the stone itself waited for her decision. Then, with a sudden roar of wings, a flock of birds burst from the cliffside, shrieking into the sky. Alex's eyes tracked the shadows that moved beneath them. Unnatural, deliberate, hunters shifting into position. Her chest tightened, instincts blazing like fire in her veins. She gritted her teeth, torn gloves flexing over her rifle, and knew with absolute certainty, orders or not, she had no choice left. The decision was inevitable. The valley held its breath. Alex pressed low against the rock, torn gloves digging into stone, rifle steady in her arms. Her wristwatch ticked loud against her pulse, each second an iron nail hammered into the silence. Shadows shifted above her, and then the world broke open. Muzzle flashes ripped from the ridgeline, staccato bursts that turned silence into chaos. Bullets snapped through the air, sparks leaping off stone inches from her helmet. The first mines erupted in thunder, dirt and flames spewing upward in a rolling shock. But the blast did not chew through the convoy. Alex had already begun twisting the trap back against its makers. Her suppressed rifle cracked, short and sharp, dropping a spotter before he could flash a signal mirror. Another leaned from cover, his scope flashing in the sun. Her second shot shattered his lens and drove him back into shadow. She moved fast, crawling low, braid whipping against her plate carrier, goggles rattling as shockwaves rolled through the cliff. Brass casings spilled from her ejection port, tumbling down the slope like beads of gold in the dust. Engines roared as Marines shouted below, confusion surging with the echoes. The convoy jerked to a halt at the valley's mouth, caught between orders and the sudden eruption of violence. Alex gritted her teeth, forcing her breath steady, her mind snapping between seconds. Tick, adjust the charge. Tick, pull the wire free. Tick, reroute the blast zone uphill, where the ambushers clustered. A round carved past her face, hot wind peeling her braid back as it dug sparks from the stone. She slammed flat, pressing torn gloves into gravel until they bled fresh. Her rifle swung back up, scope finding the muzzle flare. One squeeze, one breath held, and the rifleman folded backward, his shadow falling silent. The recoil rattled through her bones, but she kept moving, kept counting. Smoke curled from disturbed soil where she had shifted charges, wires glinting faint in the half-light. Another detonation thundered, but this time it tore the enemy's flank apart. Camouflage netting shredded into fire, men flung into the air with rocks and dirt. The cliff edge sagged, collapsing in a choking cloud that devoured their firing lines. Her watch ticked again, relentless, forcing her through the chaos like a conductor with a blade. Each second marked survival or death. She crawled higher, shoulder grinding against jagged rock, rifle still barking in bursts. Brass rolled loose, rattling downward like spilled truth, every case reflecting the pale fire of muzzle flashes. A bullet struck her helmet rim, spinning her sideways. The shock numbed her ear, vision blurring as dust and sparks filled her goggles. Her braid whipped across her cheek, carried by the violent air of rotor wash from distant reinforcements circling overhead. She spat grit, steadied her rifle with torn gloves that bled at every flex, and forced the world back into focus. The ridge to her left erupted in fire, enemy grenades cooking off as the mines she'd redirected chained together. A wave of flame rolled across the stone, silhouettes caught in mid-motion before vanishing in smoke. The valley thundered with the sound, echo rolling until it felt endless. Marines below shouted, but their voices carried upward like rallying cries. Alex slid behind a slab of stone, chest heaving, plate carrier pressing deep into her ribs. She checked her watch again, its second hand cutting through dust-smeared glass. Time was narrowing, but so was the ambush. She peeked around cover, saw movement, fired. Shadows split apart under the crack of her rifle, muzzle flashes drowned in dust. Her gloves screamed protest as she pulled herself higher, fingertips torn raw under the leather. Each climb scraped grit into her wounds, each second a battle of endurance. But instinct guided her, sharper than thought, painting the map of chaos clear in her mind. Every blast, every scream, every flash of fire. She read them like lines on a chart. A sniper locked onto her, red glint steady across her plate carrier. She dropped, rolled, fired blind into the shimmer. Her shot caught his barrel, deflecting just enough. Then, a redirected mine detonated, shredding his nest in an instant. She rose again, braid lashing in firelight, rifle smoking, her body moving before thought could catch up. The valley was unrecognizable now, cloaked in rolling smoke and fire. Enemy fire sputtered, collapsing in on itself as their trap folded under its own weight. Shadows became targets, targets became wreckage, and wreckage became silence. The echoes hung heavy, like the valley itself was gasping in shock. Alex crouched on the ridge, chest burning, lungs filling with grit and cordite. Her rifle was hot in her hands, torn gloves slick with sweat and blood. She stared through the haze, breathing hard, watching the convoy below remain intact. Marines alive, vehicles unbroken. Her instincts had bent the chaos, and survival had clawed its way from the jaws of certainty. Smoke drifted across her visor as she lowered her rifle, wristwatch still ticking. The battlefield had inverted. The hunters had become prey. Alex stood steady, braid whipping in the faint wind, her body raw but unbroken as the fight shifted downward, toward the ground-level struggle that still waited in the valley's heart. The valley was alive with fire. Smoke rolled over the ridgeline in choking waves, the echoes of detonations still rumbling like aftershocks through stone. Marines spilled from halted vehicles at the valley mouth, weapons raised, confusion and instinct colliding in the din. Alex stood at the front, plate carrier streaked with grit and blood, braid lashing across her shoulder, and raised her fist to signal forward. There was no hesitation in their eyes now. They read her urgency as clearly as the chaos above, and they moved with her, rifles barking into the haze. The air rattled with the stutter of M4 bursts, brass casings scattering into dust. Alex darted toward the slope, torn gloves clawing at rock, boots digging in, pulling herself into the climb. The first bullet snapped down from a nest above, stitching sparks across stone. She pressed against the cliff, helmet ringing with each impact, and signaled two Marines to lay suppressive fire. Their barrels flared in staccato rhythm, chewing at the shadows. She hauled herself higher, breath tearing raw through her throat, dust burning her lungs with each gasp. Her gloves tore further as she climbed, fabric ripping against jagged edges until blood slicked her grip. She ignored the sting, ignoring everything but the next pull. The next step. The ridgeline loomed closer, a jagged wall wrapped in smoke and flame. The rotor wash from inbound support tore through the valley, goggles rattling against her helmet, wind snatching grit into her face. A dugout spat fire, muzzle flash blooming like a heartbeat. Alex signaled, and a Marine lobbed a grenade with a practiced arc. The blast punched the air hollow, shredding sandbags and scattering silhouettes into silence. Dust and blood mingled into the same choking fog, covering them in the smear of survival. Alex pushed past the haze, rifle raised, eyes never leaving the shifting shadows above. They climbed together, but the chaos splintered them into fragments, each Marine fighting their own war, each second demanding choices. Alex moved like instinct embodied, steady under fire, her signals cutting through the confusion. She fired into a sniper nest, her shot precise, her target collapsing into the smoke. Her braid whipped as she turned, already pulling another Marine forward by the strap of his plate carrier, driving them up the slope. Hand to hand erupted in the haze, sudden and brutal. An enemy fighter lunged from cover, blade flashing in close quarters. Alex caught his wrist, her torn glove splitting wider as steel pressed into her palm. She slammed him against the rock, knee driving into his chest, rifle muzzle jamming under his jaw before she fired. The spray of blood vanished instantly into the dust. The climb was endless. Every movement shredded her gloves further. Every pull left smears of blood on the stone. She felt her arms trembling from exertion, lungs burning as smoke filled her chest, but she never slowed. Behind her, Marines advanced in rhythm, feeding on her determination, their fire carving pockets of silence into the ridge. A sniper's round cracked, skimming her helmet and sending her sprawling against the cliff. Her goggles slid, rotor wash tugging them further as her braid snapped across her face. She forced herself back up, rifle steadying on instinct, and fired. The nest went silent, shadow slumping forward, weapon clattering into the dirt. Dust and smoke thickened until vision blurred, until it was impossible to tell where the ground ended and sky began. Rifle fire stitched across both sides, Marines and ambushers tangled in the chaos. Alex drove forward, voice cutting through with shouted commands, each word a blade against confusion. She pulled the squad upward, one step at a time, each moment survival carved out of collapse. They reached another dugout, this one still spewing fire. Marines hunkered low, pinned by the torrent, eyes wide with the threat of being cut down. Alex didn't hesitate. She rolled low, dragging herself through gravel until her torn gloves filled with stone. Her sidearm slid from its holster, and she emptied 3 rounds into the firing slit. A grenade followed, her arm snapping forward, and the blast tore silence into the air. The ridge groaned with smoke and thunder, as if the valley itself were shuddering under the violence. Marines surged forward again, pushing through the gap she opened. Their faces were streaked with soot and fear, but their movements carried the rhythm of trust. They followed Alex not because orders said so, but because she had earned it in fire and blood. The final challenge waited further up, a machine gun nest, barrel sweeping arcs of fire that chewed the ridge into fragments. Marines pressed into cover, pinned, their momentum bleeding into stillness. Alex's chest burned with exhaustion, every breath cut with iron and smoke, but her eyes locked on the target. She knew hesitation here meant death. She moved low, flanking left, crawling through gravel that tore her gloves raw, leaving trails of blood where she passed. Fire cracked over her back, dirt spitting into her helmet, braid tangled against her cheek. She pressed forward inch by inch, rifle steady in her trembling arms. Her heartbeat matched the gun's rhythm, each burst marking her dwindling time. At the nest's edge she rose, bloodied and relentless, and hurled herself into the fight. Her rifle barked, tearing through the gunners, muzzle flash blinding in the tight space. The smell of powder and blood filled her lungs, the taste of metal sharp on her tongue. She kicked the last man back into the rocks, silencing the weapon in a spray of smoke. Silence pressed heavy in the aftermath, broken only by the ticking of her watch and the echo of her breath. Marines moved behind her, staggering but alive, their weapons steady as they secured the ridge. Dust clung to their uniforms, blood streaked their carriers, but their eyes found Alex with a weight that wasn't just survival, it was trust. She stood at the crest, braid whipping in the wash of air, torn gloves dripping blood against her rifle. Her chest rose and fell like she'd been carved from the same stone that had tried to bury them. The valley smoldered below, ambushers shattered, convoy still intact. Alex had led them through the chaos, and the ridge was theirs. Smoke clung to Silent Valley like a ghost unwilling to leave. The last echoes of gunfire faded into the stone, replaced by the soft shuffle of boots and the distant cough of an engine idling. Marines moved cautiously among the wreckage, rifles lowered but still in hand, their faces smeared with soot and sweat. The ambush was over, but the silence that followed carried its own weight. Alex stood at the ridgeline, her chest rising and falling with sharp, deliberate breaths. Her multicam uniform was streaked with dust and blood, her plate carrier scarred by impacts, straps frayed from the climb, her torn gloves trembled faintly, raw skin beneath leather stained deeper with her own blood. The Ops Corps helmet sat battered on her head, goggles pushed up, her braid heavy against her back, strands clinging to her sweat-slick neck. Below, the convoy remained intact, trucks lined like survivors who had barely skirted the edge of death. Marines gathered near the vehicles, some tending to the wounded, others simply sitting in the dirt with their rifles across their knees. The air smelled of cordite, scorched rock, and iron, the scent of a valley reshaped by fire. Smoke drifted in ribbons across the cliffs, curling into the sky like whispers of the fallen. Her wristwatch ticked steady, its sound almost louder now than the battle itself had been. Each second cut clean, marking the return of order, the reclamation of time from chaos. Alex stared at it for a long moment, then closed her fist until the torn leather creaked. The watch had been a countdown to catastrophe, and now it marked survival. Birds wheeled high above, dark specks circling slowly in the pale sky. Their cries echoed faintly, haunting but distant, as if acknowledging what had passed below. Shadows that had once concealed hunters now retreated, stretched thin by the climbing sun until they lost all shape. The valley that had been a trap only minutes before lay subdued, broken, stripped of its menace. A Marine approached, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. His face was streaked with grime, eyes bloodshot, rifle held loose at his side. He paused a few steps from Alex, meeting her gaze for only a second before nodding once. Slow and deliberate. No words followed. None were needed. The nod carried weight heavier than speech. Alex exhaled, slow and unsteady, her chest tight as adrenaline bled away. Her arms trembled faintly, her torn gloves opening and closing around the rifle's grip as if to remind herself it was still there. Every muscle screamed exhaustion, but her stance held. She had carried them through. Not by obedience, but by defiance. The knowledge sat heavy in her chest. Another Marine passed her on the slope, helmet dented, plate carrier streaked with blood not his own. He glanced up at her, gave a half smile cracked by dust, then kept moving toward the convoy. Alex watched him go, her throat tight. They all knew. Trust had shifted in those few moments, burned into them as surely as the scars on stone. The wind stirred, faint, but sharp, catching her braid and tugging it across her shoulder. It brushed against her cheek, a small, human detail against the vast silence of the valley. She let it stay there, grounding her in the present, a reminder that fragility and persistence could exist side by side. Her gloves flexed once more, blood seeping through seams, but she did not let go of her rifle. Convoys intact. The squad leader's voice came over comms, clipped, heavy. Minimal losses. He paused, his tone shifting. Softer, weightier. Because of you. Static cut off the rest. Alex lowered her head briefly, eyes shutting against the sudden sting. Defiance had saved them, but it had carved something out of her too. She lifted her gaze again, scanning the horizon beyond the valley. Smoke curled upward in thin columns, drifting like ghosts into the morning sky. The cliffs stretched away, their shadows now harmless in the full light of day. Yet Alex knew how quickly light could turn again, how swiftly silence could hide teeth. Her wristwatch ticked on, each second steady, each one a reminder that time only marched forward. She pressed her torn glove against the face of it, feeling the rhythm beat into her palm. Endurance, persistence, survival, all reduced to the tick of a clock. Yet she knew it was instinct, not the clock, that had kept them breathing. Marines began to regroup, their voices low, clipped, filled with the kind of relief that comes with survival too close to failure. A medic called for supplies. Another Marine counted ammo. A third lit a cigarette with shaking hands. Life pushed forward even as the valley smoked with death. Alex watched them all, her chest swelling with a mixture of pride and sorrow. She thought of the moment she had broken protocol, the weight of the order ignored, and the punishment that might still come. But then she looked at the convoy, at the Marines alive, at the valley held instead of lost. Instinct had carried more weight than obedience ever could. Courage had lived in that defiance. Her eyes drifted once more to the sky, where birds still circled, silent now, carried by unseen currents. She thought of them as witnesses, as symbols of violence endured and silence reclaimed. The sun had risen high enough to scatter the last clinging shadows from the ridgeline. Light spread across the stone, indifferent but unrelenting. Alex adjusted the strap of her plate carrier, feeling the grit grind into her collarbone, and shifted her rifle against her shoulder. Her braid tugged again in the faint wind, brushing her cheek, persistent as her heartbeat. She stood steady, a figure carved from smoke and stone, battered but unbroken. Her gloves were ruined, blood soaked and split, but they held the rifle firm. Her wristwatch ticked steady, each second drawing them further from the edge. Around her, Marines moved with the quiet efficiency of survival, their trust in her unspoken but absolute. The valley lay behind them now, but ahead stretched only more ridges, more shadows, more traps, waiting. Alex lifted her gaze to the horizon. The faint wind tugged at her braid again, carrying the promise of silence before the next storm. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the distant stone for the slightest ripple, the faintest shadow out of place. Torn gloves steady, rifle warm. Her chest rose with the weight of survival and the inevitability of what came next. She stood on the ridgeline, eyes forward. The valley had been survived. The war waited beyond.